Greetings, my friends. It is Uncle Mike here on December the 5th, 2022, as the keepers of the collective time-keeping mechanism like to call it. It's been a while. I hope everyone is doing well. I think the last time I made one of these YouTube videos was about 7 months ago. It was certainly my intention to take a little bit of a break, but then this funny little force, which they call inertia, kicked in, and, you know, a body at rest likes to stay at rest. So I just haven't been making videos. So I apologize about the absence, but I'm happy to be back. And now feels like, from my perspective, a rather appropriate time to make the return, as just a few days ago I celebrated my birthday. And certainly on the calendar system, you know, they use January 1 to mark the beginning of an solar cycle. And, you know, there are other systems which use other points in the solar year to mark the beginning and the end of an annual solar event. But, you know, from an individual's perspective, which we all are, the real marker of our own individual solar cycle is always going to be your birth date, because that's, you know, that's your personal one. So, you know, that's true for me as well. And so what I would like to do here today is maybe walk everyone through this past year for me from a land story perspective, which I think is kind of interesting and thought-provoking and fun, all those sort of good things which I try to bring in these stories. And then also I'm going to share with you a speech which I gave at the in the middle of this autumnal season, and I think that's kind of good too. So before we get started here, we've got a word from our sponsor. And actually, before I get to the word from the sponsor, I got another word. This summer, I think it was, I was trying to forward to someone a video I had posted sometime in the past, and I was looking through my YouTube channel to find the video, to find the right one which I was looking for. And I never watch my videos. I don't know. If you make videos, I find it strange to watch yourself. So I don't watch them. But so it was my first time. It was like kind of going through the YouTube channel from the perspective of a viewer. And I was very surprised to see that there was an ad on one of my videos, because I haven't done that. I haven't monetized. I hadn't monetized my channel, and I didn't know that I had enough of traction with viewers to do so. But, you know, it's never been of interest to me. I kind of like the purity of doing these without a financial incentive, if you will. But I saw that there was an ad, and I was like, who the fuck's getting paid for my stuff? Someone is. But anyway, so, but that being said, you know, there's the irony, because now comes the word from our sponsor. All right, let me do this, because I'm also the sponsor. Friends, are you interested in astrology? Are you confused by all of that Babylonian bullshit? Well, now you can finally learn what astrology truly is, and why it is the birthright to all human beings who live on Earth. For I am here to introduce to you the Starboard. It's my best sponsor voice. So, all right. So this is the Starboard. I've talked about this a lot. This is a tool which I have used for many years, initially to give readings, and now I use it more ceremonial. And what the starboard is it's a working I guess it's three-dimensional version of what this is, which is just an astrological chart. You can see right here, each one of these stones corresponds with a different planet. What we see in this particular image corresponds to this. There's the moon, there's the moon, there's Jupiter, there's Jupiter, there's Saturn, there's Saturn. So I've been, I made this years ago, and quite a few times people have asked me if they could purchase it. And I was like, that's the craziest thing. No, you can't purchase it. Why don't you go make your own? I made my own. But then this summer, it occurred to me that I can make my own. And there is a desire and a demand, I suppose would be the right word for such a product. So this is what I've created, the Starboard Home Edition. How do I get this back? It's been a while since I've used my recording, and I don't remember exactly how to push all the buttons, so hold on for a moment. All right, I'm back here now. So this here is the starboard, and this time of year, I know that a lot of people enjoy to buy gifts for people. If you celebrate in such a practice, and I want to add this on your list of potential gifts for those astrology lovers in your household or family. Made of Baltic birch plywood, the finest of all the plywoods. Plywood seems to have a bad reputation, but it is an excellent structured source. And this here is a model based upon the original starboard, which is usable by home. And I'm selling this, and it comes with this bag here, which are 2 sets of planetary tokens, so that you are able to build. There's one of the tokens, that's Saturn right there, Pluto right there, 2 sets, so you can build 2 different charts at the same time to do transits and to do synastry if you like. And this is a product which I am currently offering. So if anyone is interested in such a product, I have a special going on for the end of the year. This is an example. I first started making them also in color, but that turned out to be a little bit problematic, so it's only available in the natural right now. But here you can see where I've used it. It's very portable. This is at High Point Scenic Vista at the Susquehanna River. In the 40th parallel. And so the Starboard Home Edition, it's $250, 20-inch starboard, 2 sets of planetary tokens, free shipping in the US. And here's the special. This is the special for all you folks. For anyone who orders by the end of the year, I will give a 30-minute private session to get you started. The only way to order it is PayPal or Venmo. If you have any questions, send me your questions or comments at my email here, and I'll have all of this also listed in the notes below in this YouTube presentation. And then also, I'm doing one-on-one sessions again. I stopped doing those for a while, but I've begun to offer them again. I'm calling them Synchromystic Reframing Session, but it's more or less the same thing which I've always done. If you've had one of my one-on-one sessions, and what I do is I have the person who orders it, they fill out a pretty detailed intake form, and then I look at their astrology, and then we have a conversation, and we look at the current life situation. And 60 minutes, that's $119. And for 90 minutes, that's the extra session, you also receive a natural chart and information on your chrism. So, or sacred secretion, if you're familiar with it. I go through and explain what all of that means in the session. here's an example of her. This is a screenshot of the intake form, but these are examples of the type of questions which are asked. Like, it's mostly getting at looking at extremes in one's life, you know, both positive experiences and challenging experiences. And what happens in these Synchromystic reframing sessions is the same thing which I do in any of these stories, is I identify and see connections which are often unseen or maybe hidden at first glance, but then once they're pointed out, you know, it points to certain levels of integration and stability that always exist within one's life underneath the surface. So these are also available. All of these make great gifts. And Uncle Mike would greatly appreciate it. All of the orders he can get. So here's what you get with the 90-minute session. I'll explain what the chrism is. There's a typo right there. But the times where they would be, and you get a natural chart. This is what a natural chart looks like. Something which I developed so that an astrological chart begins to make more intuitive sense as to what it displays. And so this, what you see right here, is the exact same thing as you see. These two are one and the same. You see there's the moon right there. There's the moon. There's Chiron. There's Chiron. There's the ascendant. This is the ascendant. There's the sun, Venus, sun and Venus. So suddenly when you're looking at your chart, you begin to understand that it is actually a time date stamp which represents your relationship with this realm in which we're having this human experience within. And it goes from astrology being this kind of, you know, esoteric or you know, just for insiders. Like, you know, only an insider can read this, and this is very confusing. It's intimidating, but in actuality, none of this is intimidating or confusing. Once you begin to understand what exactly is happening here, well, then astrology begins to move from being just this abstract concept into something which makes sense and which you can integrate into your daily practice, for the simple sake of becoming more aligned with the natural rhythms of this realm which we're living in, as opposed to the rhythms, the artificial rhythms that are created by the culture in which we're living in. So that is my little commercial for the from the sponsor. And now let's go, let's just jump right in. We're going to jump right into this year in review land story. So let me first go and define land story. It's a term which was introduced to me just a couple of weeks ago, and it really encapsulated what I think, at least what the Susquehanna mystery is. And it's telling of the story of the land, but from utilizing all of the different contexts and perspectives which are available: geology, geography, mainstream history, hidden history, pop culture, astrology, actual experiences, you know, just the sort of stuff I always do. And so that's land story. And this past year has been it's been probably the most unusual year in my life, challenging, Plutonian, and so I've talked about that a bunch over this past year, and I don't necessarily want to go into those details, but I want to tell it a little bit differently by looking at the land story and showing how these experiences, which seemingly are happening from just like, you know, a regular life sort of level, you know, my life level, but there's something deeper which was being experienced, revealed, and for me, it is an ancestral story. My own personal lineage. So, as I said, this is my birthday was December 2nd. Today's December 5th. So, 72 hours later, 72, yeah, 24, 48, 72. I'm still in that birthday season. So I want to begin by looking at the birthday the previous year. And it was a rather ominous week of last year when I had my birthday. A few things happened. One, I turned 50. Two, I received an invitation by a 33-degree Freemason to present my research on the Susquehanna River to a sub-Masonic group highly interested in esoteric studies. There was an eclipse on my 50th birthday, and I also was I received a surprise party. I've never had that happen before, and was completely surprised by it. And, that week was an intense energy week, no matter how you want to look at it for me. Whether it's, the birthday and the whatever cultural programming comes with the number 50. There was an eclipse, whatever comes with, an eclipse happening on your birthday. There was the complex nature of a Masonic invitation, and then also the energy of actually receiving a surprise party. That's kind of wild. And I've told this story many times over the past year, and, kind of the whole process of the Masonic invitation, and then the deconstruction I did of that invitation, and the are they going to ritually sacrifice me and all that sort of stuff. And that all came to a head on the day of the January 27th of this calendar year, when I gave the Freemasonic presentation, and I concluded in a admittedly cheeky way, saying that the presentation which I just gave was not really for the people who are in the room, but they are witnesses, for it was an initiation between myself and the universe. And I took a bow, and, a little bit full of myself, and, who got the last laugh? Because within a 7-day period, unexpectedly, the structure of my home life had come to a very quick halt, and I found myself moving to Baltimore. And that's where our story is going to begin here. We're going to look at that from a little bit of a land story perspective. This red pin is where the house which I had moved into, and never been there before, just barely knew the gentleman whose home it was. I had done some sessions with him, and I knew that he owned a variety of properties, and when I was in a difficult spot needing a place to stay, I called him up on a whim, thinking that maybe this is a place I could move in, and sure enough, it worked out. So I'm going to begin by showing you this video of where I was, where I lived in Baltimore. It was in West Baltimore. This was the street in which the house was off of, and it was, at one time this was a rather spectacular neighborhood within Baltimore, but the upkeep, I suppose, of the neighborhood, the quality of life has changed over the last 60 years, and it's become a little bit of a it became, you know, it changed its flavor. I mean, for example, this house right here, what you're seeing, they were raising pit bulls, fighting pit bulls. And sometimes they would get loose and run across the street, and that was always a little bit interesting. But this house itself, which I was living in, was it was really, really spectacular. We're looking at these decks that were built, and this house is on a ledge overlooking a 150-foot drop down to that. It's called Gwyn's Falls. I don't know if you'd call it a creek. It's about 40 feet across, but that it was a spectacular view where I found myself living. The house was beautiful on the inside, but it also came with some challenges, such as not having heat, having no gas hookup. Right here was the only shower that worked. It was an outdoor shower. This was, I don't know when I made this video, but you could tell by the lack of foliage on the trees that it was still in winter. It looks like a rather warm day in winter. There's my friend Jesse. It's been a while since I've seen Jesse. If you're watching this video, Jesse, I hope you're doing well. I think about you often. And this is where I found myself. We'll go and look at this video a little bit more. But my stay in Baltimore, particularly in hindsight, as I review it, was you know, I found out what I was made of in many ways. You know, and you know, Baltimore's a tough town. You know, I don't necessarily mean that like in terms of like a tough guy town. Certainly that is a truth to part of Baltimore, but it's, you know, it's tough. The roads are in horrible condition. You know, everything about it requires some degree of toughness. You need to wear your armor. That's Scotty right there. That's Scotty's house. You could see the inside. He renovated this entire place. Everything came from the Habitat Restore. You know, this is all secondhand cabinets, appliances, all of the material to make the decking. I mean, it's rather spectacular. You could see right here the thermostat's at 53 degrees because there's no heat. We've got the windows open because it was a sunny day and we would capture the heat. The way the house was built into the bedrock, that it would absorb the heat, and we would try to lock it in to the best of its ability. But this was the place where I was living. Look right here. That's the Alchemist, right? We're going to make reference to that in a little bit, but that was on the coffee table. This spot, which we're about to walk out onto, the lanai, was where I spent the majority of my time during the winter. It was probably the warmest place during the day, wrapped up, and I really became aware of the natural cycles. Looking down here, you know, we were above the tree lines. These trees were below us, and watching eagles and hawks fly by. The bird life was spectacular. Every morning we'd put bird seed on this this knee wall right here of the deck, and the birds would come by. And then I would watch families of foxes and deer and all sorts of animals, and you'd begin to learn their rhythms. And, you know, that was basically how I spent the winter. But what was interesting, you know, I didn't know this when I moved in. This is the address of the house, 4505 Prospect Circle. This is where my mother grew up. You know, you could see this is less than a mile away. My mother grew up off of Hillsdale Road in West Baltimore, near the Forest Park Golf Course. And you know, here I am, serendipitously finding myself living in this house. And right here we could see this is called Leakin Park, and this is Gwyn Falls, that body of water which we saw in the video. So, all right, so I moved in, as I showed right here, I moved in on Imbolc, 2/2/22. Not done on purpose, that's just the way life unfolded. And after After 12 days there, I was like, holy crackers, what did I get myself into? And I rented a car from Hertz in York, Pennsylvania, a little bit further north in Baltimore, and I drove down to the villages in Florida, which is where my parents live. I thought this was always interesting, the 303 and the 99, for people who like to look at numbers. So I did this February on Valentine's Day of 2022. And then my return flight, I just booked the car one way, and I wasn't certain how long I was going to stay or what I would do. And my sister also lives in Florida. She lives in St. Petersburg, so I went to go see my sister, and then I booked a flight home from St. Petersburg to Harrisburg International Airport, which is an airport in central Pennsylvania, near where I lived in Lancaster. And if you recall, this is at the same time that the Russian invasion of Ukraine occurred. So I booked this flight and I went down to St. Petersburg before any of this, the large-scale invasion of Ukraine began. And, depending upon how much value you place upon mainstream narratives, but Ukraine always involves Crimea. It involves Crimea, which is this peninsula right here. This is the Ukraine. It sits in a very important geopolitical spot on the northern side of the Black Sea, and often the interest in Ukraine has to also do with Crimea, and I'll explain why that's important in a moment. Here we have St. Petersburg. That's where I was going down, the Crimean Peninsula, and so forth. All right. So why does that matter? So as we saw right here, we've got Gwyn's Falls, and this house, which we saw overlooks that body of water. It is this green area is known as Leakin Park. So Gwyn's Falls, Leakin Park. It's 1,200 acres of continuous woodland, and it's the largest woodland park of any East Coast city. And Leakin Park became a park once the Winnians estate was acquired by, I don't know, whoever, I guess the city of Baltimore. However, parks become parks. And so who is this Winnians guy? So the Winnians guy was the son of the Baltimore and Ohio railroad builder Ross Winnians, and in the 1840s, this guy Thomas Decay and his brother William, they went to Russia, and in Russia they built that country's first railroad from St. Petersburg to Moscow. So right here, remember, I go down to St. Petersburg. And upon Thomas returning from his trip to Russia, he goes back to Baltimore, which is where he was from, and he had his new wife, and he built her a beautiful home, and he wanted it to remind her of her homeland in Russia. And so he built her a house, and they named it the Crimea Estate, right here, the Crimea Estate at Leakin Park. So my trip from Baltimore down to eventually St. Petersburg, and then back to Baltimore, back to more specifically to the Crimea Estate. This is where the house was on Prospect. This is where that actual Crimea Estate is. How far away is that? That's 4,200 feet, less than a mile away. That I'm finding myself as my life is, going through its own civil war, if you will. I'm reenacting the same the same travels, though in a different place, but similar names, as what's happening in the world in real time. The Ukraine invasion, Crimea, St. Petersburg, all of that is in play. So I knew that this year was going to, as all of the personal elements of my life were unfolding, I'm also watching this kind of synchromystic land story unfolding. So let's go and look at the next key marker in the year for me, and I'm going to call it the Pittsburgh decoding. So on April 23rd, there was an event. There was an event which was organized by Spatial Creativity out of Pittsburgh. That's Brother John and Kufu. And they live in Pittsburgh, and they had been inspired by the work which me and Ross Ben have done, our Mystics of the 40th Parallel series, looking at the land stories of Philadelphia and the Lancaster area, both in Pennsylvania, and they had done their own sort of decoding of Pittsburgh on the western side of the state. And so they invited us to come and participate in it, and then also to do our own type of research. And so I was really excited. This was the first time that something like that has happened, for me to go to another area outside of the research I had done in central Pennsylvania, and to apply same sort of techniques to something new. Here's a picture of us out on the tour. As you can see, it was a really diverse and interesting group of people, of human beings, all sharing a commonality of wanting to understand more deeply the significance of the land in which we live. And so I'll share with you a little bit of my presentation in Pittsburgh. We did tours during the day, and then at night I gave a presentation, and then Ross Ben gave a presentation. Mine was called Deyaoga, I think that's how I pronounce it, Homecoming to the Womb, or Pittsburgh, a Mocking of a Nation. And it was a story of what home means to the children who live upon earth. Home is our foundation. From our home, we grow. Growth is directly related to the stability. Growth is directly connected to the stability of home. Everyone's original home was their mother's womb. And this word Deyaoga is an ancient word for the land which is currently known as Pittsburgh, and it refers to, or it translates as the umbilical cord of the earth. And so this right here is a satellite image of, I guess this is part of the East Coast and maybe the Midwest. This is Long Island. This would be New Jersey right here. There's the Delaware Bay. There's the Chesapeake Bay. This is the 40th parallel. That's where Pittsburgh is. Right here is where Lancaster is. And this is where we find Pittsburgh. Beautiful place of three rivers. And the umbilical cord to the mother, spiritual center, destination. And so that's what the presentation was looking at this part of the earth and how it had traditionally been known as the home, the original home of humanity. And I went down a path. I even mentioned it here. Let's see if I have it. Oh, there it was. one of the earliest known sites with evidence of human presence and continuous human occupation in the New World is found right by here, the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. And so I basically delved in deeply into looking at the land of Pittsburgh as identified by not the three rivers, but the fourth river included, which is an underground river, which is where we're all standing right here. Right here is the point where the three rivers, or where the rivers meet. It's really two rivers, and then the convergence. But this is the beginning of the Mississippi River. There's a fourth river underneath it. There's all of this research. There's all of this fellowship which is happening, and so this is part of this land story experience. Like, I mean, this actually happened. This is, I did this, and so this is part of my my land story and review. So shortly after that, that was a weekend long event, and it bared a lot of fruit, but I had returned back to Baltimore, and shortly after that, less than 30 days later, I'd moved to Gnome Countryside, where I'm still living in southern Lancaster County. And Gnome Countryside is, I've talked about this quite a bit. It is I mean, there's obviously private residences which are on the property here, but it is a destination nature trail and ecological education site geared for young children, usually first grade, second grade, that sort of stuff. And living here has been it's been a real special sort of place. So here's some pictures. This is Gnome Countryside. This is a satellite imagery. This is probably, I don't know, maybe like 15 miles across, to give you a little bit of scale of how far we're looking at. And all of this patchwork type of greenery, that's all farmland. This is a very agricultural area. This is the closest big city. There are 2 stoplights in this Quarryville town, and here we are in Gnome Countryside, and this dark green patch is a wooded area, so surrounded by all of these farms, probably about 50% English, 50% Amish, is Gnome Countryside. To give a little bit of a grander scheme of where things are, this is where Philadelphia is. The city of Lancaster is right here. Here's Baltimore. There's D.C. This is the Chesapeake Bay. This here's the Susquehanna River. There's a Delaware Bay. So I'll show you this video right now. This was the back of Gnome Countryside, and we call this the valley. There's this creek, and I would go regularly. I would as you can see right here, I'd set up a chair, and I would spend my time. And one day I got the impression that I want to do a time-lapse video. I didn't know what I was going to find, and so I think I was probably down there for about 4 or 5 hours, and this is about a 2-minute clip of those 4 or 5 hours. But there's something really interesting. So we're talking about land story, we're talking about unusual things, and so I'm just kind of doing what I would normally do. I would be kind of maybe in contemplation. I've got like my notebooks, probably was doing some exercise, some movement before just kind of sitting in this really kind of special spot. And then you see right here, I get this desire to go and I pick up that notebook. I wasn't picking up, I didn't have a notebook in hand, but I go and I picked up that notebook. And if you happen to notice, you could probably pause it right now and go back a couple seconds, and you'll see that it was just when this orb appears. It's an unusual orb too. And I'm sitting there. I picked up the notebook. It's kind of strange watching yourself in this situation, but we could see this orb, and I'm in some type of contemplation. I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't remember that. And we could see this orb, and it comes in and out of I guess not focus, but of amperage. Is that the right word? You know, it gets bright and then it gets less bright. And watching this in hindsight, so I go through this process. So I'm getting ready to write. You know, I grab the notebook again, I settle back down, but I'm not writing anything. Something's going on in this mind. I don't know what's going on. And now we've got the second one. Now we see the second one starts to appear right here. And right when it appeared, did you hear the bird? Bird's talking. Bird wasn't talking before. And then when these two disappear, I immediately begin to start writing. And I guess I could go and read what I wrote. It was kind of interesting, to be quite honest, particularly in context of what seems to be happening, that I'm like in some sort of trance, and then these orbs pop over my head, and then I start writing. But, you know, that is part of this land story of this past year for me. So watch this a little bit longer, and we'll see when the writing begins, and pay attention to these orbs right here and the timing of the writing and their disappearance. It being December right now, and it's getting pretty cold out, I look at this video and definitely appreciate the warmth. It's also interesting, I did a video later on this summer, right here where my cursor is. That's where me and Ross Ben, we sat right there, and we did a video talking about MycoFest. Oh, actually, I haven't gotten there yet. So MycoFest is the next part of this presentation. So looks like they're starting to fade. They're fading away. Top one fades. Let's see when I pick it up. Or I start writing. That one's gone. Nope, it's still there. That's gone. This one just about faded away. Now it's gone. And then let's see what happens here in this guy. Oh, what's that over my left-hand shoulder? And now I begin to write. So the next touch point in this year of review is MycoFest. And so MycoFest was a mushroom festival that was held in Pennsylvania, and I presented at this festival, as did Ross Ben. And the reason why that happened was the organizer, William Padilla Brown, had seen what we had done in Pittsburgh, and he wanted to include that level or that type of consciousness, that type of storytelling, that type of research into his program or the festival, MycoFest. And so that was in early August. And so these here are these are slides from Ross Ben's presentation. So where MycoFest was held, it was called Stonehenge Gardens and Holistic Learning Center, and the capstone of Ross's presentation was this diagram, or at least the capstone, in my opinion, was this diagram where he showed, beginning in Philadelphia, starting with the work he's best known for, his Great Mystery, Philadelphia, tapping into a key location there, and looking at these key markers on the land of Pennsylvania, that it made this pentagram, and that includes Scranton. I've talked a lot about Scranton, Bloomsburg, Mike Bloomsburg, the whole bunch. If any of you remember the story about like the monkey virus, the truck that turned over and the 100 monkeys that were running all around on the highway in Pennsylvania, that was in Bloomsburg. That happened in, I believe it was January of this year. Stonehenge, which is different than Stonehenge. I think that one of those is a typo, but because they're not exactly the same word. But there's a megalithic park right there. There's Harrisburg, the capital. There's Ephrata, the Ephrata cloister. And so Ross did this really fascinating presentation showing about the urban geomancy stemming from Philadelphia and how it spreads throughout Pennsylvania. Like these lines right here, these are the Appalachians. Scranton right here sits on the largest deposit of anthracite in the entire planet. And so we see how all of this is connected. And Stonehenge Gardens, where MycoFest took place, is located right at right here, right in the center of this pentagram. And what was so interesting, what was so powerful, in my opinion, like, I was watching the presentation being told live. He had the center stage. It was on, I think it was like the Saturday night, like it was the premiere time to present. There are probably like 100 different presenters who were at MycoFest, and so Ross had a really, really good time slot. And we're all watching it, and he is showing for the first time, like, I don't know anyone else who's ever like made this sort of connection before. So he's showing it in real time, like, hey, look, this exists, to an audience of probably like, you're not going to see a higher concentration of people whose consciousness could appreciate both intellectually and mystically what Ross's type of research presents, with like geomancy and ley lines and conspiratorial thought. And we're seeing this exposed for the first time outside of Ross's own mind, and we're all sitting right here. Like, this is where we're sitting. We're sitting in Stonehenge Gardens as he's presenting and showing us. He's like, oh, and this is where this place, lines up with the ley line manipulation, some of it being organic to the land, and some of it being just urban geomancy through public artworks and architecture and all of the other things which go along into that sort of practice. And so it was this really charged event. The Pittsburgh event was immensely charged, what we were talking about and the people who were there, and that led to this event, and this was also another charged event. So we'll go back to, that's all I want to go into this story right now. I believe Ross's full presentation is available on his channel for anyone who's interested. I'd recommend watching it if, you like this sort of stuff. But after MycoFest, actually there's a date that's missing. On Halloween, Mr. Rich, the man behind Gnome Countryside, it was his 80th birthday, and we had an 80th birthday party at Gnome Countryside. I'd say probably about 150 people showed up to it, and I gave a speech. at that presentation. So I will read that speech after I go through the conclusion of this land story review, but that occurred, and then shortly after that I left for what I'm calling the Southeast trip. I'd been planning for some period of time of beginning to really travel and present more than I had in the past. And I'd been talking about it since I at least moved to Baltimore, but it did not come into real fruition until a couple weeks ago when I went down, when I took a trip down to Florida. In fact, I retraced that original trip from 222 to go to St. Petersburg, and I went down through North Carolina. I spent time in Charlotte, and then Columbia, South Carolina, where I stayed at Ras Naim's house. Ras Naim would be, let's see, this is Ras Naim right here, and Ras Ben was there, and I was there for 2 days, and we were crafting. They were doing wire wrapping. I was doing the type of work which I do, and spent a few days there, but it was a continuation, I guess is what I'm saying, like what began in Pittsburgh, which then showed up at MycoFest for Ras Naim, Khufu, Brother John right here. We all were sharing a really big tent together. Who else went? I believe Emily went to MycoFest. Jesse wasn't there. Is there anyone else from this group that attended? Oh, Riley. There's Riley right there. Riley was in attendance as well. But it continued down to the Southwest tour, where I stayed at Ras Naim's house for a few days, then went down to West Palm. My good friend Liz Catt had set up an event there, 2 events actually. Then I went back and spent some time at the villages where my parents live, did St. Petersburg, and then made the way back up, returning to Pennsylvania. And so it was probably about 3 weeks on the road, and it was definitely like a test run, I guess, if you will, to see what that looked like and felt like. And I just had an amazing time. I was visited and joined by Christy for the second half, and so that was it was both of our trips. And so where I want to go and conclude this land story review of the year with where I was last night. So last night was the 4th, and let me see, that's probably exactly a year to the day of either the eclipse or the surprise party. And so I was invited to go to dinner at a house in probably about an hour and a half from where I'm staying in Gnome Countryside, in a part of Pennsylvania which I did not know very well. And at the end of the dinner, the gentleman who owns the house, he wanted to give me a tour. Well, I did not realize when I came into it, it was dark out and I couldn't get a good view of what the actual structure looked like. But the house, the original part of the house, was built in 1792. And it's in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And I 2 years ago on my birthday, actually, like there seems to be a lot of this birthday stuff. For the first time, I became aware of my family lineage on the wann line, my father's line, and the very first wann who arrived in the New World was this Johann Wilhelm Wann. I was able to trace back through my father, grandfather, and so forth, back to this gentleman right here, you know, my ancestor, who was born in Rhineland-Pfalz, I guess is how I pronounce it, and then he moved to Amity, Berks, Pennsylvania. And I knew that like because I learned about this 2 years ago, but I wasn't really familiar with Berks. I was able to identify it on the map. And so when I was at this house during this dinner, and I've had some other interesting dinners, and I think I've talked about it in some other videos, in Pennsylvania of homes from the colonial times. The house that I was in the county, which I knew that that my my ancestor, going back home, maybe you're beginning to pick up on the theme here. My ancestor, where he first arrived in the New World, in Amity, in Berks County. We could see it right here, and I could see that he married I guess my great so forth grandmother in Amityville, Berks, PA. So the place where the house was right outside of Bechtelsville. Never have I been to here. I've like driven. No, I don't even think any of the roads I've driven on have ever been around here. I mean, this is not any place which I was familiar with, but this is where the house was. It was built in 1790s. I can go and see that I had family that lived in that area right around the same time, and they got married here in Amityville, which is less than 10 miles away from where that house was. And so that was particularly significant when considering that this all began here with my trip to Baltimore, where I was less than a mile from my mother's childhood home, where her mother lived, which was, her family line does not go back quite as far as my father's family line, but the circumstances of this past year, which seemed to be very much about home, I'm finding that the land story is just reconnecting me, unbeknownst of my consciousness for whatever reason, to the land of my ancestors. So that was kind of like the year in review for me from that land story perspective. And it's definitely a setup for the next year, which is coming. I feel like there's going to be a whole lot more travel as I go and become more experienced and situated with what it's like to be on the road that much. Big part of it is also with the Starboard. I'm going to be doing a lot of demonstrations, I suppose, as I move along. So that was the first part of this video here. Now the second part is I want to go and read to you a speech, or the speech, which I gave at Mr. Rich's 80th birthday party. And so let me kind of paint the scene for you. It was an absolutely beautiful day. It was probably in the 60s, late October, unseasonably warm, sunny out, full crowd of people. And I knew I wanted to give a speech. And the majority of people who were in attendance didn't know me. I didn't know them. And certainly I don't think were expecting, a bunch of people gave some speeches or said some words at the birthday party, but as you're about to hear, this was a little bit different. It was definitely at least longer. It was 20 minutes long, I think, is how long the speech itself was. And the way that the house is situated is that there is a deck which is about 20 feet above the ground. The ground is sloped, so you could stand on the deck, and because the land slopes down, the people who are on the land are beneath the deck. And so it was on the deck that I gave this presentation to 100 people or so who were in the grass. And so the primary purpose of this presentation, or this speech, was an ode to Mr. Rich. It was his 80th birthday, and as you hear in this presentation or this speech, I do my typical Synchromystic storytelling, but I included a little bit about the details of what was going on in my life at the time. But for you folks here, you're going to understand maybe a little bit more, have a little bit more deep of an understanding of the context of the speech. So without any further ado, let me begin. So The title of the speech is The El Camino Trail at Gnome Countryside, an Ode to Authentic Living. We are gathered here today to honor the 80th anniversary of the birth of our dear friend, Richard Lee Humphreys. Normally, at a birthday celebration for someone with 80 years of life experience, it would be appropriate for someone, such as myself, to stand before the guests and reflect upon the life milestones of the person being recognized. However, if you know Mr. Rich, then you know normal and appropriate have no business at his celebration. So consider yourself forewarned. It is easy to imagine what our dear friend might be feeling at this moment, surrounded by his closest relations, celebrating his birthday at the site of his lifelong work, the grounds of Gnome Countryside. But living life is complex, and surface-level analysis rarely reveals the depth of any situation. On one hand, it must be a fulfilling experience for Mr. Rich, but on the other hand, it must also taste bittersweet. Let us go back to that enigmatic year of 2012. Mr. Rich experienced an epiphany while sitting in a movie theater watching a documentary on the renowned pilgrimage of medieval origin known as the El Camino Trail. At that moment, somewhere deep within his inner world, Mr. Rich saw himself, 10 years in the future, turning 80, breathing the Spanish mountain air and standing on that legendary trail. And he made a declaration to himself and everyone within earshot ever since that in October 2022 he would celebrate his 80th birthday on the El Camino Trail. Certainly that was an ambitious goal for a then 70-year-old partially blind diabetic. But if one were to look at the long list of milestones and accomplishments reached over his lifetime, then one would see that this man has demonstrated over and over that he has the capability of making the world bend to match his vision. How else can you explain the long-term success of the outrageous idea of creating a gnome nature trail in the heart of Amish countryside to support a family of 5? But the truth is self-evident. However, we can look around now at his 80th birthday party and clearly see that Mr. Rich is not breathing the Spanish mountain air. He is here at his beautiful home surrounded by those he loves. Certainly a wonderful day, but not exactly the glorious vision he held for himself for 10 years. Or is it? In May of this year, I moved into Gnome Countryside. Mr. Rich and I spent the spring and summer discussing his many preparations needed for his upcoming journey. His excitement was palpable. About 2 weeks before he was to leave for the El Camino Trail, Mr. Rich came to the difficult conclusion that his 10-year vision for his 80th birthday, high in altitude, breathing that rare Basque air, was not going to happen. Earlier in the summer, during a low blood sugar episode, he fell and hurt his knee. Also, during this time, he experienced a rapid reduction in his already impaired vision. And despite what all of the omens were saying, he was still trained every day throughout the summer for his autumn journey, all the while turning a deaf ear to practical thinking. It took the gentle touch of his daughter Courtney to help him swallow the bitter pill that was always sitting atop his bedside table. On that fateful day in mid-September, she came over to help her father start packing his bags for his quest, and it was then that Mr. Rich finally saw clearly, for the first time, the reality of his situation. After canceling the trip, he slowly descended into a period of deep introspection. His calendar was free of nature programs because he planned to be overseas, and now he had plenty of time to be alone with his thoughts. And I watched this man, who had always seen the world bend to his will, settle into the possibility that maybe those days are behind him. Make no mistake, Mr. Rich is no stranger to setback. He has had many good plans fall through. A walk across the United States ended prematurely in Nevada. A career as an art teacher was cut short due to a hemorrhaging eye. His 200-year-old home he planned to live until his final days burned to the ground. And yet his phoenix always rose from the ashes, and he always persevered. By meeting life with his unique blend of tenacity, kindness, and humor, there had always been a wondrous and unexpected vista around each bend of his curvy journey. But this time felt different for Mr. Rich. He was tired with a capital T for the first time in his life. Perhaps it was just what turning 80 felt like, or perhaps it was the weariness that naturally comes from 60-plus years of managing his oscillating blood sugar levels. Perhaps it was just what it felt like when you put down the goal you carried for 10 years. Whatever it was, Mr. Rich had no choice but to be still and learn to see in the dark. And now our story takes a pivot. I first met Mr. Rich 10 years ago in the spring of 2012, the same year his El Camino vision came into focus. My 2 sons were enrolled in Miss Linda's early childhood program at the Susquehanna Waldorf School, and I was driving them to an end-of-the-year field trip at Gnome Countryside. As I traveled down Bridle Path Road for the first time, not knowing what to expect, I see a man in lederhosen, an unusual knit cap, and oversized sunglasses directing traffic to the parking area. There was a line of cars before me, each one taking a moment to speak with the gnome man. When it was my turn, I pulled up next to him, rolled down the window, and keep in mind this was our first meeting. I asked a clarification question. "This is the Starbucks drive-through line, right?" And without missing a beat, he said, "Yes, of course it is. I'll be happy to take your order and your money." And that was the beginning of our rich and rewarding friendship. This spring, I found myself living in Baltimore, but wanting a unique housing situation to return to in Lancaster. So I called Mr. Rich, knowing he was well connected to many people, and I thought he might have some leads. However, when I explained what I was looking for, he told me that he had just gotten off the phone with his housemate of the past 3 years, who literally just told him he was moving out, and the rest is history. Now, something you need to understand about your narrator is that I practice a little-known technique known as dream walking. Dream walking is not for the faint of heart nor the stable in mind, because it is the practice of interpreting and understanding waking life in the same way one would interpret a dream, where every setting, person, and experience is a symbol of something deeper. As I moved into Gnome Countryside, I was at a crossroads with life, and it is at times like that dream walking becomes particularly valuable. While in Baltimore, I reread the literary classic and international bestseller, The Alchemist. In dream walking practice, the books you read and the life you lead are connected by an invisible thread of unknowable continuity. For those unfamiliar with or have forgotten, The Alchemist is the tale of a young man in Spain who goes on a long journey to only discover that the gold he sought was buried beneath his home all along. Once I settled into Gnome Countryside, I began walking the surrounding roads. When I walk, I'm drawn to high points where the views are the best, so I walked to the top of the highest point surrounding Gnome Countryside, and I found an intersection, or crossroads. I stood there contemplating my next step in life, taking in the broad, expansive view, when I noticed the name of the intersecting street: Salem Road. The Alchemist begins with a chance meeting with the King of Salem. In the story, the King of Salem encourages the protagonist to sell his belongings and start a journey to discover his personal legend, using signs and omens, the language of the world, as his guide through the unknown. The character of the King of Salem was used as a literary symbol for navigating life's crossroads, and I was literally at my own internal crossroads, standing at an external crossroad, contemplating which way to turn, when the King of Salem presented himself in the humble form of a street sign. As I said, dream walking is not for the faint of heart nor stable in mind. So throughout the summer, Mr. Rich trained for the El Camino Trail by walking every day, and I too walked each day to Salem Road. Each time I reached the sign, I looked around for someone there in the flesh, hoping that I would actually meet the King of Salem. The Alchemist was melting off the pages directly into my actual living experience, and I wanted to see how real it got. But Salem Road is a remote road, and disappointingly, I was always the only person there. I had no choice but to accept the anticlimactic conclusion that maybe the King of Salem is only metaphorical in my life, and that I must find him within. Not as exciting as I had hoped for, but I meet life as it presents itself and not as I imagine it. Now let's pivot back to the El Camino Trail. The El Camino Trail is a 500-mile network through the mountains of France and Spain, concluding at a shrine of the Apostle St. James the Great, found in a great cathedral on Spain's Atlantic coast. The El Camino Trail became a major pilgrimage route of medieval Christianity starting in the 10th century and is now considered one of the three great pilgrimages of Christendom, along with Jerusalem and Rome. But as signified by the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation, the El Camino Trail has transcended any limited appeal to followers of one particular faith and is now for the entire human family. The full name of the trail in English is the Way of St. James. In Spanish, the native tongue of the pilgrimage's destination, is El Camino de Santiago. The Alchemist is the story of a Spaniard named Santiago who goes on a pilgrimage. Can you see how the story threads are beginning to weave themselves together? The Alchemist is the story of the El Camino Trail. It is told in dream language using metaphor, characters from the Old Testament, concepts from the Quran, and magics from the grimoires. The Alchemist is not about the physical trail. The Alchemist reveals the essence and the purpose of the El Camino, but also gives instructions on how to take a pilgrimage. Book-wise, a pilgrimage is defined as a journey where a person goes in search of an expanded meaning of self through the experience. The process brings about personal transformation, after which the pilgrim returns home to their daily life. Or said more simply, a pilgrimage is a meaningful walk with lasting results. A constant I have seen ever since living in Gnome Countryside is whenever I take Mr. Rich into town, undoubtedly someone comes up to us and says, and it's always more or less the same thing, "Mr. Humphreys, I'm so-and-so, and I've visited Gnome Countryside as a child, and I've never forgotten it, and now I take my children there. Thank you, thank you." It's a pretty long-lasting result for what is simply billed as a nature walk for children. Gnome Countryside is a mystery whose whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Yes, it is beautiful, but not the most stunning landscape Mother Nature has made. Yes, the gnome motif is charming, but is not the most enchanted setting out there. There is an invisible variable that balances the equation. What else could explain why so many people are so impacted for so long if it is simply a 3-hour field trip in the woods? I sat with the question, what is the magic or hidden variable behind Gnome Countryside, for most of the summer? And once Mr. Rich's 10-year quest came crashing to a halt, I added more questions to my list. What is the connection between Gnome Countryside, the Alchemist, and the El Camino Trail? In what story does all this make sense? So I went to where I go seek counsel, the crossroads at the highest point. Last week I walked up to Salem Road, and I did what I always do. I squatted in front of the roadside and waited. This day was a little bit different. It was an Amish holiday, and the workhorses were not in the field. As I squatted on the other side of the road, a striking, all-black Belgian draft horse walked to the fence, squared itself up, and stared directly at me. The only thing separating us was a thin strand of wire fencing in about 20 feet of country road. As the horse stared at me and I stared back, the idea popped in my mind that it was foolish thinking to only look for the King of Salam in human form, because the King of Salam can show up any way he desires. So we continued to stare at each other, seconds feeling like hours. With no progress on the horizon, I decided to press the issue with human-to-horse telepathy. Applying all my focus and concentration, I projected the following questions into the horse's mind. Are you the King of Salam in equine form? And if so, can you give me a clear sign for confirmation? Nothing. Not a move, not a grunt. Just stillness and unwavering eye contact. When it finally occurred to me that the King of Salam might not speak English, out of nowhere a contractor's truck drove between us, breaking the trance. The horse immediately turned and walked away. Then, as I looked to my left to the cause of the communication breakdown, I saw the name of the business on the back of the truck. Yesco. Not the exciting confirmation I was hoping for, but I accept life as it presents itself, not as I imagine it. As I started the return trip to Gnome Countryside, I realized the important question had not been asked. How does El Camino Trail, the Alchemist, and Gnome Countryside tie together? I thought I had wasted my chance with the King of Salam, but when I reached the wooded patch on Bridle Path Road, everything made sense in my mind, tied together in a perfect little bow. And now, as we're reaching the end of this tale, I will reveal to you the secret of the El Camino Trail at Gnome Countryside as told to me straight from the proverbial horse's mouth. The truth is this: there is nothing uniquely magical in the grounds that make up the El Camino Trail. It's just one, albeit a very well-known one, of many pilgrimage sites that provide a different stage to answer the same question. What is my relationship to the whole, to life, to God? The reason this question needs to be answered is to understand one's individual purpose for the mystery of being alive. The Alchemist's author refers to this mysterious purpose 30 times in his book, using the phrase, discovering your personal legend. A pilgrimage to the El Camino Trail is not required to discover one's personal legend. It is just one of the many ways to do so. There are people all over the earth who discovered, without going to Spain, the El Camino Trail's secret for unlocking your personal legend. And Mr. Rich, obvious to all of those who know them, is one of those people. He is unique, however, that his personal legend is woven tightly into something he built to be shared with others. Gnome Countryside. As he hand-carved and manicured each path, as he painted each gnome hat trailblaze, as he put each gnome door on the base of a tree, he planted in the soil, he imbued in the air, and he permeated the water, the blueprint of how to discover one's own personal legend. How do I know that to be true? Because truth is self-evident. It was the process of building these trails that Mr. Rich discovered his own personal legend. The two cannot be separated, and now all one needs to do is walk these grounds to feel the subtle whisper of secrets of how to find your authentic life. That is the missing variable. That is why people never forget this place. That is why they keep coming back. This home helps everyone find their own. Mr. Rich, your vision for the 80th birthday was always 2020. You are on the El Camino Trail. Life is never wrong. The only thing that can be wrong is how we interpret life. The El Camino Trail is not what we think it is. It is only the finger pointing at the moon. It is not the moon itself. The El Camino Trail is a means to discover something inside, something you discovered long ago. At every program, Mr. Rich asks the same question: what does it mean to be true to you? And the answer is this: listen to your heart and have the courage to follow through. This just so happens to be the very same definition for discovering your personal legend, according to the alchemist. At the end of the book, Santiago learns the reason he needed to go to the pyramids in Egypt was to discover that the gold he was searching for was actually buried beneath a sycamore tree at his home in Spain. Mr. Rich, you did not have to go to Spain because long ago you learned the El Camino Santiago's lesson. Ladies and gentlemen, as you look around at each other, there is only one conclusion to reach, and that it is that we are all his treasure. Happy birthday. So that's it. It feels good to be back. It feels good to tell stories again, and I hope to hear from a bunch of you. Hope everyone's doing well. Take good care.